Bonsoir and good evening. I'm Bertrand Buchalter. I'm the director of the Institut français du Royaume-Uni, and I'm very happy to welcome you here tonight, and also welcome to those who are joining us online tonight for this event. I'm all the more happy because today it's our first event after the summer break, and it was a break longer than the summer, actually, with all the things that we've been through. And today, it's a major event for us because we are launching a new series of conversation around design in an expanded field. And we thought that there could be no better way to start this new cycle of conversation and to organize a conversation around Charlotte Perriand, around the beautiful exhibition that is still going on at the Design Museum till the end of this week. So for those who haven't been there already, you should rush and see this wonderful exhibition. And we are thrilled because tonight we are joined by a number of panelists, and I'll briefly talk about them in a minute. But we are joined by the director of the Design Museum, dear Tim. Thank you very much for being with us. And we are joined from Paris, and they arrived just a few minutes ago by Charlotte Perriand Barsac, and by Jacques Barsac, who of course have a long companionship with Charlotte Perriand. Perrand is the daughter of Charlotte Perriand, and both of you've worked with Charlotte Perriand, and you will share with us your first-hand knowledge of the work of Charlotte Perriand. So, welcome, bienvenue, cher Perrand, bienvenue, cher Jacques, à Londres ce soir. Of course, I mean, I'm not going to talk too much about Charlotte Perriand. Our panelists will talk about her tonight. She used to say that she had it's hard to translate in English. She had the eye in the shape of a fan, un œil en forme d'éventail. And she was truly a unique figure in the sense that she engaged with all the arts without hierarchy, without categorization. And she was obviously a pioneer. She was a female architect and a female designer in a world that was very masculine then, and hence she remains a very inspiring and a very decisive figure in the field of architecture, in the field of arts. So tonight we'll have two sets, two different sets, and the first set will bring together various panelists. It will be chaired by Jana Scholz. Thank you for being with us. And we'll be joined by Pat Kirkham, Hélène Bertin, Laetitia Baudo-Osman, and Eni Kuka-Tuomala. Some of you will be with us tonight here in London, and some of you will join us from France online. I'm also very happy because we were able to organize this event in our salle classée. We call it the salle classée, which is also here at the Institut français. Since the opening of the Institut français, we've always been very attentive and always very keen to closely work with designers and artists. And I could talk to you at length about this room, the designers, those who were involved in the design, those who were involved also in the design of our grand staircase. You've seen the wonderful tapestry of Sonia Delaunay on your way up here. And so it's only natural that we come here tonight together to discuss Charlotte Perriand. Without further ado, I'll pass on the floor to Tim. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being part of this Charlotte Perriand momentum, because we thought that it would really give like the exhibition giving a new impulse, and for those who didn't know yet the work of Charlotte Perriand, momentum, because we have also projects going on with the Design Museum. Thank you for being with us, Tim, tonight.
Bertrand, thank you. I was going to take your microphone in the spirit of sharing, but obviously we can't do that in the current climate, so apologies. But I really want to sincerely thank you and Isabel and indeed all your staff. One of the great things, one of the many great things, but one of the standout things about Charlotte Perriand is this idea about collaboration and synthesis. She is one of the great figures of the 20th century, without a doubt, in the cultural sphere across design and architecture. But in a world dominated by male ego, her ego seems to be a much more generous, open, collaborative thing. And that, I hope, is reflected in the exhibition, which has been designed by Assemble, who are an architectural collective who won the Turner Prize a few years ago, alongside a graphic design organization called Practice for Everyday Life. And they see it as a kind of collaboration with Charlotte, just as the exhibition in some ways looks at her collaborations with Prouvé, Jeanneret, Corbusier, and other artists, but actually reaffirms, as if that needed reaffirming in France. It doesn't. In this context, we're speaking to the converted. But in Britain, Perriand is not as well known as she should be. And we hope that this exhibition goes some way to rectifying that. She came to London 25 years ago. And in fact, I was looking through the archives and records and worked out that she celebrated her 93rd birthday at the Design Museum in our previous building at Shad Thames. And the then director, Paul Thompson, he was reflecting with me and he said he remembers her as an incredibly energetic 93-year-old wearing pink sneakers, leaping about the place and actually insisting where bookcases went and actually tweaking the where furniture was. She was on her feet all day. And that kind of engagement and the idea that creativity is lifelong, I think is another thing that's affirmed by her in this exhibition. I just want to thank one or two people aside from the Institut Français, because the way exhibitions are made in institutions, often they happen and then they finish and then something else happens down the line. And that remarkable exhibition in Paris at the Louis Vuitton Foundation, we saw it, we were amazed by it. It was something that could only have been done, I think, in Paris at that institution. But there was so much that we wanted to try and work with, build from. And because of the generosity of the Louis Vuitton Foundation and the curator, Sébastien Charouet, and Jean-Paul Claverie, we were able to do that. But in particular, Panette and Jacques, who are here today. I've said many things about you without you being here, but I reiterate what I said. Your collaboration, your generosity, your scholarship, your learning, your openness to collaborate in all sorts of different ways is really important, and we're really grateful to you. And it is brilliant to see you here finally. I mean, literally, you were on the train an hour ago. You couldn't come for the opening. We had this terrible fear that this might be the first major exhibition that you'd been involved in that you weren't able to come to. You were incredibly generous in the loans that you facilitated for us and that you lent to us. And one of the things we also wanted to stress in the exhibition is the notion of process, how creative ideas come into being. And some of the drawings that you lent us have never been seen, and certainly have not been seen in this country. And even that was by the skin of the teeth. You know, Justin, our chief curator, who you'll see in a minute, literally had to come and hand courier these things the day before the press were due to come in. So it's been one of those things where we're breathing a sigh of relief because we've got to the end and it's happened, but we're incredibly sad that this Sunday it closes. And I love the fact that we're now having an event, we're having a series of discussions towards the end of an exhibition where we've got time to think about what we've seen, what we've put on, rather than these things often happening at the beginning where people have put a show on and they've not had time to contemplate. So this is an important reflection as well as the idea of momentum. Anyway, in that spirit of ongoing collaboration, I'd like to hand over to a colleague and collaborator, Jana Schultz, who is she's a design curator. She's also a professor at Kingston University, and she leads the MA in design curating, which is a partnership between the Design Museum and Kingston University. So it's like handing on the baton, literally and metaphorically. Jana, please come to the stage and bring your panel. Thank you very much. And thank you, Jacques and Panette. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you so much, Bertrand, for this wonderful welcome and introduction. We will start now the first session, and the first session, we want to kind of connect to, in many ways, to what the previous two speakers emphasized, to this amazing woman, Charlotte Perriand, who was in many ways the sole woman in a very, very male world. And we felt, when we prepared this discussion with Isabel, that far too little emphasis has been given to this idea of, was she a person that kind of started a context? Not she started a context, but that needs to be viewed in a context of feminism in the making. We want to very much leave this open to be also rejected, but also to be confirmed tonight. And in preparation with my guests that I will introduce in a minute, we very much said that this can only be the start of a conversation. And we very much hope, in the spirit of what Tim just said, that an exhibition is a start of many, many things. And it's wonderful to have this at the end of the exhibition, to see this probably as the start of something new, and definitely a longer discussion. That was something that all my guests have been confirmed, that it can't be discussed in 1 hour. And we are very aware of this. We are also very aware that we have a female panel that discusses these things, and we want to kind of emphasize, all of us, that it is not just something that should be discussed amongst females. We very much hope that in the discussion later on, that we have also male participants joining the discussion. Without further ado, I would like to invite my 5 guests to the panel, and I have to say, in the spirit of having this as a blended event that happens online, and I should also welcome everyone who is online with us, and not just here in London. I would like to introduce my 5 guests, and I have to start with, unfortunately, with a sad apology, because one guest, Katrin Gell, which you will find on the program, can't join us today because of a very 21st century problem. She is in the French mountain, and we realized yesterday that the signals are too weak to speak to her, which of course caused quite a lot of comments amongst our group, that this is very much in the spirit probably of Charlotte, who would say, please focus on the mountains and not on any discussion that should be held, having someone who really loved the mountains. I will start introducing one of our guests from Paris, Laetitia Badou-Haussmann, who is an artist whose work revolves around notions of power architecture. Her research is situated in the intersection of several fields, including domesticity, feminism, and psychology. And Laetitia's practice is centered around the concept of design and its history as social and political expression. She works in various media: sculpture, installation, sound, video, and text. But her main medium, interestingly enough, is the exhibition, and we will hopefully talk about that. She had various residencies in the Palais de Tokyo, as well as in the Villa Kuyoyama in Kyoto, and also teaches in the Parsons New School in Paris. She has been part of various solo and group exhibitions in major museums, such as, of course, the Musée de la Moderne in Paris, the Centre Pompidou, but also Kettle's Yard in Cambridge and Mudam in Luxembourg. Important for our context here and the discussion is that she is the winner of the 2017 AWARE Prize, and AWARE stands for Archive of Women Artists, Research and Exhibitions. My next guest here in London is the designer Enikuka Tumala, who is a Finnish designer who lives and practices here in London, and she calls herself an empathy artist and designer. Her vision is to transform an individual feeling into a collective and radical power for positive social change through public interventions, installations, experiences, processes, but also tools which she develops for institutions such as the Finnish government, if I'm right. Amy recently showed her work as the designer for the Finnish pavilion at the London Design Biennial earlier in the summer, and was one of the designers in residence of 2020 of the Design Museum. Welcome, Annie. And thank you for joining me here on stage. Our last guest joins us from Leicester here in the UK and is my dear colleague, the design historian and professor for design history in Kingston University, Pat Kirkham, who is also a professor emerita at the Bard Graduate Center, Decorative Arts, Design History and Material Culture in New York. Pat has written extensively on design, film, and gender, and amongst her many publications, I've only selected a few who are relevant for our context, A View from the Interior, Women, Feminism, and Design, which she edited together with Judy Edfield in 1989, as well as the important work on women designers in the US, 1900 to 2000, Diversity and Difference, which was published in 2000. She's currently completing a book on Charles and Ray Eames and Hollywood design, film, and friendships. Again, Letizia, Pat, and Annie, welcome to this panel. We have asked all our guests for a short intervention, which will be followed by a discussion. Our session, however, will start with a very special presentation that was made for tonight, for this event, by the artist Hélène Bertin, who brings together three generations of women artists: Charlotte Perriand, of course, the about 20 years junior and long overlooked Valentine Schlegel, and herself. In 2013, Hélène Bertin started her research on the 20th century French sculptor and ceramicist Valentine Schlegel. It's work which has slowly but profoundly influenced her vision of the art. Her practice spans from sculpture to workshops and research using hybrid processes where she sits in between artists, curators, and design historians. She works in Coucaron in the Louboutin, where she invites people to work with her, so to participate in the process of creating works of art. Hélène Bertin develops art by creating links which always questions the notion of otherness. She again, and as well, is the winner of the Aver Prize, which I mentioned already with Letizia, and Hélène won the prize in 2019. I would like to now invite to show the film of Hélène.
Entre crête et vague. En 2015, j'ai répertorié et photographié le travail de Valentine Schlegel. Lors d'une prise de vue d'une cheminée, il y avait la table forme libre de Charlotte Perriand. Dorénavant, je savais que Charlotte et Valentine cohabitaient chez les autres. L'eau de source et l'eau salée. Charlotte Perriand naît à Paris, mais élevée à la campagne, elle développe un lien très fort avec la nature. Elle commence à arpenter la haute montagne quand les stations de ski n'existent pas encore. Ce sont des échappées de partage avec des proches plus qu'une pratique solitaire. Elle choisit des excursions et des destinations à chaque fois différentes. J'aime la montagne profondément. Elle a été de tout temps le baromètre de mon équilibre physique et moral. La ville est le lieu où elle travaille et la montagne est son poumon. En 1939, elle part se réfugier dans un village alpin jusqu'à son départ au Japon. Lorsqu'elle revient en France après la guerre, ses passions enfin convergent. Elle conçoit des refuges, puis elle est associée à la création de grandes stations de ski. Grâce à son expérience d'alpiniste, elle maîtrise les enjeux liés au territoire en altitude. Perriand saisit rapidement la dualité que le progrès impose à la montagne. Les premières congés payés ont annoncé le déferlement des citadins à la campagne. Le tourisme prend le dessus sur l'agropastoralisme. 22 années après Charlotte, Valentine Schlegel naît sur la plage, comme le disent tous les Sétois. Elle grandit dans une maison le long du canal royal. Elle s'approprie les codes de cette ville occitane, passe beaucoup de temps avec les pêcheurs et navigue sur sa barquette marseillaise. Valentine a aussi un corps athlétique, mais elle ne pratique pas de sport. Ce n'est pas relié à un dépassement d'elle-même, comme le revendique Charlotte. Ce ne sont pas des randonnées, mais des dérives. Ce ne sont pas des traversées, mais du cabotage. C'est une manière de prendre le temps, de le rendre élastique. En revanche, son travail est physique. Elle essuie sa sueur lorsqu'elle modèle sa terre et quand elle construit en plâtre. Valentine s'installe en 1945 à la capitale, après avoir fait l'école des beaux-arts de Montpellier. Elle commence un travail de céramiste et parallèlement, sa maison de famille à Sète devient un espace expérimental pour les prémices de son travail en plâtre. Elle abandonne peu à peu la céramique et change d'échelle, en devenant créatrice de cheminées. Le milieu du XXe vit une transformation brutale. Perriand et Schlegel sont conscients du changement de leur espace de ressourcement, devenus des espaces de villégiature de masse. Pendant leurs allers-retours Paris-Province, elles remplissent leurs gourdes de tout ce qu'elles regardent et enregistrent des disparitions, notamment celle du labeur des bergers pour Charlotte et celui des pêcheurs pour Valentine. Elles manifestent chacune un intérêt fort pour l'ethnologie. Cet intérêt est un héritage. Elles ont ouvert la voie vers des pratiques qui croisent le champ de l'art et de l'anthropologie que notre génération prend à bras le corps. Le sac à dos et la besace. Chacune glane des objets. Charlotte a eu une mère collectionneuse, alors elle rêve d'épure. Elle reçoit en cadeau de son premier mari, Percy Schofield, un appareil photo et s'attache aux formes d'objets trouvés dans ses promenades, que ce soit des rognons de silex ou des blocs de neige. Le Corbusier les appellera les objets à réaction poétique. Valentine, quant à elle, chine des objets. Elle fait les puces tous les dimanches matins à 7 et revient avec des couteaux qu'elle cloute au mur sous la forme de bancs de poissons ou de vieux outils qu'elle accroche sur des planches comme des tableaux, pratiques à l'usage et beaux au regard. Charlotte dit de ses yeux qu'ils sont en éventail et Valentine se pense comme un guetteur. Leurs glanages accompagneront leur travail et leur création. Le caillou poli façonné par les glaciers et le galet roulé façonné par les eaux. Lorsque l'on regarde des chaises tout bois de 3 ou 4 pieds de Charlotte Perriand, on peut les associer au siège de berger, qu'elle a photographié dans le Vercors, ou encore la ligne de la chaise longue basculante, dont la forme s'inspire d'une attitude de randonneur, qui met sa musette sous son cou et ses pieds contre un arbre pour la sieste. Perriand pratique l'architecture. L'élévation chez elle est une réflexion qu'elle aborde autant dans son travail que dans l'arpentage des sommets. Sur les 100 cheminées de Valentine Schlegel réalisées, peu sont construites dans sa région natale, peut-être car son activité transpose son paysage méditerranéen ailleurs, notamment en ville. Ce sont des excroissances des murs, des sculptures à vivre. Ainsi, elle dit « L'architecture intérieure, pour moi, c'est une façon de recréer un paysage vivant où l'on puisse habiter. Parce que notre paysage extérieur n'existe plus, parce qu'on ne vit plus dans les jardins, dans le paradis terrestre. J'ai toujours vécu sur et sous les bateaux, les coques, les voiles, dont ce grand souffle méditerranéen, si essentiel quand on y a vraiment vécu. Comme je n'ai pas pu y rester, je le recrée. Ce que je fais, ce sont de grandes voiles, des gonflements de vent, je recrée ce qui m'a créé. » Toutes deux développent leur sensibilité en travaillant souvent à partir de matériaux naturels. Bois, lauze et paille pour Charlotte, cuir, argile et plâtre pour Valentine. Aujourd'hui, en pleine crise écologique à rebours, leur choix semble en avance. Elles avaient instinctivement choisi des matériaux bio et géosourcés. Les baigneuses de soleil. Ces deux femmes solaires qui se sont consacrées à l'amélioration de l'espace intérieur semblent paradoxalement des femmes qui ne vivent pleinement qu'en plein air. L'espace intérieur, selon elles, n'est que le parfum de l'extérieur. Ces deux femmes recherchaient des formes à travers des sources ancestrales. Leurs créations s'accrochent enfin comme des mousquetons à la longue chaîne de l'histoire de l'art. Leurs portraits photographiques, dans ces grands espaces, en ont fait des figures mythiques. Leurs paysages montagnards et marins sont autant pour elles des lieux de jouissance, de ressourcement, qu'un terreau pour leur création. C'est aussi cette simplicité de vie qui a rendu ces deux femmes légendaires. Il faut espérer que leur grande notoriété n'aura pas un effet dévastateur sur la compréhension de leur art. Lorsque je regarde ces photographies, j'y lis épanouissement, spontanéité et force tranquille. Ce qui me reste aujourd'hui en tant qu'artiste, c'est l'adhésion de leur art de vivre et de travailler. Elles nous tracent, à nous les artistes, la voie pour travailler en accord avec le milieu naturel. Aujourd'hui, pour s'émanciper peu à peu de la prégnance des grands centres internationaux, fiefs du marché de l'art, beaucoup d'artistes recherchent de nouveaux lieux de vie et de création dans des territoires plus isolés.
Thank you so much, Helen. We would like to now see our two other speakers again. There they are. And I would like to immediately hand over to Letizia for her intervention.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's very special to be part of this panel discussion about the work of Charlotte Perriand. And I'm also going to take the opportunity here to thanks again very deeply Charlotte Perriand and Jacques Barzac, because they've been supporting me a lot when I did my research a few years ago. I'm going to go over this last 10 years of work where Charlotte Perriand have been very present in my in the shaping of my of the vision of my work and of a certain understanding of the world also. So as it's a bit also it's a bit strange to be after Hélène, which I know she's also a friend, and about this video, which was very nice. So it's a totally different setting. It's now in my studio in Paris. And okay, so Jana introduced my work. I am a visual artist. I'm working with very diverse medium, and I'm definitely focusing on design and architecture as a kind of like a filter in a way to understand social and political dimension and to bring them into the field of contemporary art. The context are absolutely fundamental for my practice. And I started to really been driven into architecture and institution problematics in 2010. I've been working with Musée d'Art Moderne at that time, and then I started to develop a research about the history of this institution during the show, which was called Dynasty. Then in 2012, as a resident artist, part of the Pavillon, which was a residency with Palais Tokyo, I then started to work on Charlotte Perriand's work because in the 60s, at that time, it was Jean Cassou, which was running the formerly Musée National d'Art Moderne, which was in the building of the Palais Tokyo. And for Charlotte Perriand, it was kind of like the first like important commission from a museum for her to produce the furniture for the muséographie, where she developed, where she basically was invited to produce 40 daybed, the Tokyo bench, La Banquette Tokyo. And working on this part of the historiography led me to make a very important inquiry about those Tokyo benches. So it was for me basically the door to the world of Charlotte Perriand to understand how she's been developing this design. I actually have the beautiful book, and this is the pattern of the Tokyo bench, which one you may know, of course, but it's really influenced by their observation of nature, as Hélène was mentioning, and the skeleton of a fish, and it was really inspired by her research in Japan. In 2012, starting to observe and to understand Charlotte Perriand practice, I was very interested also by her inspiration that she withdrew from Japan, but also in the reverse during my like deeper, larger research. It was often said that she was very influential also to Japanese designer and artists. So I was very interested to understand what does it mean, this idea of influence. And I think this is where like it's a kind of like umbrella world in a way, but it's definitely like the way I've been definitely took into this kind of like the ghost train of Charlotte Perriand, which could be called in this way. And so therefore from that point, she really had a very strong influence also, or presence, orientation toward my own understanding of shapes or of context. Then I decided to bring further the research and to apply for Villa Kujoyama, which is a residency program for French-based artists in Japan. And that was at that time I spent 6 months going very regularly to Rue Las Cases at the archive of Charlotte Perriand, where I had the chance to meet Bernette and Jacques. And to do like very slow research. What I understand, then I spent 4 months in Kyoto. What I understand with this research and what does it mean of her being an influencer on the Japanese design at that time was not necessarily in the question of the shape themselves, but it was more in the question of their authorship. And this was really something I find I had a kind of like intuition, but also answer like the very last day before leaving Japan after 4 months. Because Japanese society is very much organized about the idea of community, and specifically at that time in the 50s, and it was less individual. What I've been told, it was like Charlotte Perriand's energy and eager to life and generosity, as it was said in the introduction of this momentum. This idea of generosity, of also no hierarchy in a way, had a very strong influence amongst all the students. Mostly, I'm talking mostly about the students and less about the craftsman and the different workshops that she's been working. But I think she really allow lots of people to go absolutely like deeper into their own intuitions and into their own sense of observation, and maybe in a kind of like less egotistic way. So again, it's my own conclusion, of course, but I think we all like have our own observation, more or less scientific, but also like a kind of like derive also on her work, and she's definitely like bringing up this possibility to be very close to one intuitions, and I think like her body also, a body and her own position towards nature, or towards a room or towards a space, have been like really the key also of most of her design. As we were mentioning, like one of the video, which is in the design museum, when she's talking about the kind of like boomerang desk, where she said, like, she stated very clearly, like, this shape came about an observation of an issue about communication. So she's a wide observer, and has the eyes in éventail. Sorry. I am actually, I would love to talk more, but I think my time is very over.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laetitia. And we will come back to several points, I'm sure, in the discussion. I would like to invite now Annie to the stage and to her intervention.
Thank you very much. What a brilliant act to follow. Thank you so much, Jana. And it's wonderful to be here this evening. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's really an honor to get to talk about Charlotte Perriand's work in the connection with my own practice. So really thrilled to be speaking with you all today. My name is Enni Kukka-Tuomala, and I'm the world's first empathy designer and artist. And that means that my creative practice across art and design is solely focused on the fostering of empathy, whether that's in different communities or places or spaces, which is what I'm here to talk about this evening. My vision is really to transform empathy from this individual feeling to the radical and collective power for social change that it truly is. And through my practice, I really aim to transform empathy from an ingredient in the design process, where we often use empathy for the purpose of design, to actually making empathy the outcome of design, designing for empathy. And because of this, I'm absolutely thrilled tonight to be making the case that I very firmly believe that Charlotte Perriand was the first and the original empathy designer. I believe that through her approach and through her work and her commitment to reforming society through radically modern design, she was actually designing empathy before the time we even knew the radical meaning behind it. So that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. And I'm going to be sharing a few examples of Charlotte Perriand's work that really, truly inspire me and that I also feel very connected to in my own work. And through that, I'll share a couple of examples of my own work as well. But tonight is really about sort of being inspired, but also standing on the shoulders of a giant who paved the way, but also really set the scene, created the context, as Jana said beautifully earlier, not just for us as female designers, but really as designers who are very concerned with themes of political, societal nature and the role that design can firmly play in actually radically transforming our culture and our communities. So I wanted to start by talking about this notion of Charlotte as the first original empathy designer. A lot has been said and researched about her commitment to creating better, more comfortable, more open spaces for living. And really this belief that Charlotte Perriand had around what better design meant, which was a better life. This notion that we could actively transform the way we live, the way we connect with oneself, and the way we connect with each other, and the way we connect with our natural environment through the spaces that we live in, through the spaces that we occupy, both inside and outside. So one of the first examples I wanted to share, starting off with space as an expression of empathy in the built environment. So I'm going to be looking at the built environment and the natural environment, which go very hand in hand, I would say, at the core of Charlotte Perriand's work, but also in my own practice. This exceptional vision that she had in really transforming the floor plan and breaking down walls, creating these very open spaces, but also spaces that were multi-use and multifunctional, like in the example for sport and work, which, thinking about life today, was absolutely revolutionary in creating a space that was equally functional for work, for activities, for leisure, all the important things in life who make us who we are, who allow us to live a good, fulfilled life. And this sense of openness is something that I really feel set the scene for the way we live today, but also the kind of work that I strive to do in terms of using space as a tool to really create a scene where we can better connect with one another. So building on the incredible legacy of Charlotte Perriand's work and the sense of openness in space and multi-use of space, and this commitment to access and affordability through her radical use of different materials, more affordable materials and manufacturing techniques, I wanted to share an example of my own work, a very recent example. So this is the world's first empathy headquarters, which I recently opened in London in the area of Bow in East London. And this is very much an open, multi-use space, but this time in the public realm. So I've moved from these examples of Charlotte's work in a more sort of private dwelling space to a publicly open space. So the Empathy HQ is both my working studio, but it's also an open community space for local residents. So it's actually a shared working space between myself and the local community. And we've got a shared program of events and workshops, really with the idea that an artist and designer can work so closely with a local community. And I would say that this, again, I draw so much inspiration from Charlotte's work in the sense that she had this incredibly collaborative approach and worked through these partnerships, whether it was through other artists and designers, or actually the people who then got to inhabit her spaces. The final example before I move into some of the natural environments was, I wanted to touch on an example from later on in Charlotte Perriand's career, the beautiful tea house, so closely linked to her time and experiences in Japan that was already talked about earlier. And the sense of really designing a space that was intended for meditation and reflection, and this opportunity to really deeply connect with oneself, which is such a beautiful starting point and concept to really literally make space for us to connect with ourselves. And this draws a very close link to one of my most recent installations, the Empathy Echo Chamber, which I recently exhibited at the London Design Biennale, which was also a space for reflection and meditation, but actually this time not with oneself, but with another person. So the Empathy Echo Chamber is a temporary space in the fact that it's both a space because it has walls and a floor and a ceiling, but it's also a non-space because it's made of air. So it's literally made of air, it's inflated, and inside 2 strangers were invited to connect in a very intimate moment and go through a series of empathy exercises together. So again, these are some of the themes of reflection and meditation through spaces that we design and curate, but in 2 slightly different contexts. But finally, before I finish, moving on from our built environment to the natural environment, which is such a key focus of Charlotte Perriand's work, and something that I've recently really started exploring in my own practice, actually through the residency that I had the privilege of doing at the Design Museum. This connection with nature, this link to nature, this dialogue with nature, both through materials, but also these very direct sort of behaviors of collecting beautiful objects and items, being inspired by the surroundings, but then also very deliberately designing for the natural environment. And this comes back to my original claim of Charlotte Perriand as the original empathy designer. The way she approached designing in the natural world is exceptional. I think this commitment to creating spaces and structures that really blended in with the environment is unheard of. And a piece that I've especially been inspired by recently are some of the freeform tables that were already talked about earlier. This connection with taking a natural material and allowing it to be celebrated in its true natural form. And then as a designer, to only creating a small intervention, which is often the hardest thing to do, is absolutely genius. And in my current work called the Forest Empathy Project, which I started at the Design Museum, I'm in the process of designing my first collection of empathic furniture. So I've been looking at a lot of examples of Charlotte Perriand's work at the moment. I'm creating a set of chairs and a table for the Finnish Forest Museum. So couldn't be looking at a better guide and inspiration than Charlotte Perriand. And then finally, just touching on some of the spaces that I already mentioned, this notion of creating spaces that are not just intended for the human body, the human mind, human emotions, but also very much designed for the natural environment. This duality of focus and this, what I would call, universal approach to empathy, of really considering everyone in that context, whether human or non-human, I think is incredibly unique, and something that I absolutely believe in this time when we're, as designers, incredibly pressed in working in a way that addresses the climate emergency. I think Charlotte Perriand really set the direction and the stage for all of us to come. So I'm going to finish here, but I'm thrilled to answer some of your questions later, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you. Because we are pressed for time, thank you very much for this also new definition of Charlotte. I would like to hand over to Pat Kirkham to hopefully give us a little bit more of a historical grounding or rooting for Charlotte.
Can I still have 7 minutes, or do you need me to cut it a bit?
I think you can.
Okay, I'll start. I am setting up. Well, what two wonderful, empathetic panelists. It's really filled me with joy to hear the other two presentations. I just wanted to briefly think about some of the broader issues related to feminism, feminist scholarship, women designers, and actually, when Tim said process, I realized that that's very often how, when I would be interviewing Ray Eames and she was just saying, oh yes, we did everything together, right? It was really when talking about the work and the process that you got the sense she would just remember things, and people in the office would say, oh yes, you know, when we were doing this, this happened. So that, I really like that focus within the exhibition on doing that. So I have 4 points. One of the things that I think is really very useful in terms of better understanding the very, myriad ways in which women became and become designers is to think about their early years and early education maybe, but even, upbringing in the home. And when I did that big sort of 4 or 5 year research study with grad students and colleagues in the US, it became really clear that, across that period, 1900 to 2000, that there were connections, particularly in the areas where women were really marginalized with their early lives. And every day that I opened my front door with my Yale lock, I'm remembering Madeleine Yale Wynne, who in the 1910s and 1920s was an art metal worker in New York. She had a sort of bachelor girl studio apartment. And of course, she was the daughter of Mr. Yale, who invented the Yale lock. So she, as a child and as an adolescent, had access to probably one of the most famous metalwork laboratories in the world, and also a father who encouraged her. I've also written some articles called If You Have No Sons, and I think families in which there is no sons in the past, often there would be greater encouragement for the girls to do those things. Thinking about Madeleine Yale Wynne and opportunities takes me to Virginia Woolf, and I've just been rereading her a bit recently. And in 1927, Virginia Woolf, the great English feminist, modernist writer, says there isn't any question that women have got talent. We don't even need to talk about that anymore. Just get that out of the way, if only we could. Anyway, what she says is, what women need, first of all, opportunity, and second, for her, money, she insists upon, to allow that access to the things that she wanted to do. And in the name of her famous novel, what she wanted was a room of her own. She wanted somewhere where she could shut out the rest of the rubbish, the domestic chores, not that she was very good at that. And the Woolfs did have a servant, I was surprised to hear. And the Eameses always called it their housekeeper, but I like to say also that they have a servant. And there are always various things that give some women more opportunities than others. And money is also another way of talking about class. And I think that's something that we all need to do much more, and we all need to do much more at this moment. So that's what Virginia is suggesting we think about, and I think that's really interesting to take back through the past and into the future. The other thing is to really, I think, broaden the way that we think about collaboration. And I think recently there's been this movement to sort of see some sort of binary opposition really between working with men, and then certainly it works for Perriand. I think that, here she is working with men and here she is on her own, and we have to find, and it's so much easier if the woman then works on her own, because you can then claim her as like the sole auteur. But then you're into these muddy waters or tourism, is it the great white female designer as opposed to the great white male designer and things. And I was just saying to Letitia, as we were chatting earlier, as a student in the 60s, I worked on some male-male collaborations. So, and when they went to court, when they split up their partnerships, that's when we get a lot of information about the nitty-gritty of those partnerships. I think they're all unique and they're very difficult to trace. But one of the things that I think is very interesting, that it's very often not their male colleagues who are saying they didn't do anything, which is so often the case. I've had so many people who knew nothing about Ray Eames tell me she didn't do anything. Or when I was working on the graphic designer Saul Bass and Elaine Bass, she only worked making short films with Saul. So there was a whole area in which she didn't, but she was always a secretary, people would say. That this, well, we all know about that. But in many ways, Charles Rennie Mackintosh with Margaret MacDonald Mackintosh, he says, she has genius, I have mere talent. Charles Eames says time and time again, because it's almost irritating to hear or to be in a situation where she's, being sidelined in front of them. Everything I can do, Ray can do better. And it's not just a sort of jokey thing, but it's a nice, easy way of making those points. Now, it's not always outside assumptions, but I think those bigger, wider, societal assumptions. Sorry, it's my kitchen timer. I'm up 7 minutes. So we need to nuance those about women working alone. And my last point is that today we live in a world, with huge, huge challenges. You know them as well as I do. Climate change, pandemic, equal rights, diversity, difference, the lot. And for me at the minute, it really is a socially aware and the empathetic Perriand who speaks to me at the moment. That's where I'm, drawing strength from. And I think her desire to design for working class people as well as middle class people, the focus on the natural, the sustainable, and on the local. So for me, it's a social, political, and personal engagement. Her life force is also extraordinary. So let's do what I've been doing recently and think, what would Charlotte Perriand be doing today? And what would she be telling us to do today? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat. I'm a little bit wondering, because we are very strict in time today, whether we should finish here, and because we will. No, do I have more time? Yeah. Okay. So we can at least start probably with Pat's brilliant last question. In asking what would Charlotte ask us today to do, and how would she kind of react in a world which is so urgently needs someone and needs many who are like Charlotte, being very kind of very sure of herself in the contribution that she wants to and can do in a quite in a very troubled world at her time, but also today. And I would like to remind us, probably coming back to this question of feminism in the making, whether because Katrine described it so well in what she wanted to address, was this question of how we define feminism today as being between doing as well as men to I'm a woman who designs. And in both, there is the feminist claims that the feminist is at the heart of this claim, so and at the heart of this practice. And it would be nice to kind of discuss for a minute: is this the approach that is important for this time, to kind of really put the feminist into the center, or is it something that we also hope that Pernette will join us in the discussion, that the observation that some of you have made, and we started the discussion with, that actually Charlotte, being the sole woman in a very, very male environment, the surprising part here is that she very rarely reflects on this. She very rarely kind of starts saying, I'm the sole woman, I feel vulnerable, or should there be more? It seems like this is not really her concern. Her concern is she is just there, as she says, with this constant obsession with creation and innovating. So that is probably where I would like to kind of come back to Letizia, who so very brilliantly, I think, described the influence, the strong influence that Charlotte Perriand had on her artistic praxis.
Thank you, Jana. So I think now also reflecting, like listening to Annie and to Pat, and also like Pat, one of the points was talking about the early years. And I remember in the few, the numerous writings and texts and information I went through about Charlotte Perriand, like reading about the importance of mother, of Victorine Perriand, I think. And if I remember well, I think there were like this idea of like how much she could have been like an important role model. And also, so yeah, there's this element which is fundamental, definitely fundamental, to have the possibility, to have the capacity to have a role model. And I think, again, like reflecting like for now and what is the position of Charlotte Perriand now, for me, it was definitely a role model of like a figure that was not present in a familiar circle or in a larger circle, or even in the artistic circle at this period. But it's another conversation. But I think also like about the question of feminism today, for me, my approach is really the question of equality. This is a core, for me, it's a core feminism. It's really the question of equality. And again, going back to Charlotte Perriand and previous information we went through earlier, the importance of sport in her life, in her personality, in her observation, in every aspect of her life or of herself, and sport really bring her as an equal to other practitioners, so other men, and I feel. And she needed the mountains, and the mountains need her, or maybe like the mountain shaper in a way, and I feel maybe then, because she had this such a strong building of herself with the nature, with a role model, with this idea of like this very deeply core idea of equality. Maybe this was a way to not even have to address or to stand with the flag of feminism as it erased in the later 60s, 70s, at least in France, because it was also like a conversation in France as it was a different one in the UK and in the States and so on. So it's also very important. But maybe this was a way to deconstruct this and to even avoid the discussion, because for her, she was wherever, even before or always and ever equal to men. And this is maybe what bring her at the very first beginning, when she knocked at the door of Le Corbusier's studio, just being graduated, like, let me get in, and he was very rude to her. And then she did the Bar sur le Toit, which was absolutely astonishing. She was better than anyone else at that time, probably. So I think somehow she deconstructs this question by another path.
Brilliant. I would like to kind of come back on the one side, probably to this question of the equality, and which so very much comes through her, this also in her strong sense of freedom that she was desiring. I mean, I remember in her autobiography that she says, just at the very sad point of her divorce from her first husband, where she said, "I was drunk on freedom," and which probably shows also this power that she could ignore. What we feel probably is this fighting for me as a sole woman in a male environment. Can I probably move to Annie with the claim of an empathy designer to kind of say, what do you think would she do today? I mean, in this world where we are also at this brink of needing activists, needing people who have this kind of freedom to break the rules and start, or being convinced that they can contribute to a better future.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I imagine, or I would like to imagine, that she would be quite surprised that we're only now catching on to a lot of the ideas and the practices that she started decades, if not almost a century ago. I think Pat mentioned this in her speech, but this unique sensibility that she had to work with local materials, local traditions of making, whether that was in Japan or Vietnam or in the mountains in Maribel. I think a lot of those practices are now things that we're, as designers and design community, really starting to embrace and adopt. But it's taken us quite a long time. It's happened, but quite slowly. So I imagine that she might be a little bit shocked by that, but also glad to see us really starting to embrace these practices. And I would imagine she would be doing what she was doing then, is really being a trailblazer and being wholeheartedly herself. I think something that struck me with what was being said earlier, this sense that whenever I see any images of her, she's always smiling and laughing and so clearly at the center of herself, which I think is just remarkable in general as a human, but also going back to this context of most of those photos are her as the sole female. And I think so often we can easily as women sort of, and as a very enthusiastic and energetic woman myself, it's something I really recognize, where sometimes it can be, you can be almost sort of driven to try and dampen that down, because you see all these very serious non-smiling men and then Charlotte, who's absolutely jubilant, and again coming back to her both as a trailblazer, as a designer. I think sheerly through that life force and that personality and that energy, I think she would have been breaking the mold, not just in how we work, but the enjoyment we take out of that work. Those are some of the things I always gravitate towards in her, obviously thematically in the sort of very politically and socially driven work that we try to carry on the torch, but also in that manner of doing that work, even when you're working on very serious and important topics and themes, you don't have to be always as serious about it. And that's something I think is really revolutionary in itself as well.
That is a very good point. And I would connect to this with kind of this question of independence, but also combined with respect, which I see in her so strongly, which on the one side, as Bertrand has already mentioned, this kind of positive ignorance of disciplines, of kind of being a designer, being an architect, being very close to art, making communications design, and kind of even something that you could see as propaganda when she worked on the front rooms for the architecture, for the agriculture ministry in Paris, and being very kind of deeply involved in research at the same time as being an artist, but also being able to, in this respect for others, to collaborate in a way where she hands over things, where she says, I need my colleagues, I need my friends to work with them. And I would like to invite Pat to ask, is this a quality that you see as a characteristic of many women in the 20th century? Because you refer to a number of them who quite often were in the shadow of men who they were in partnership with, and you mentioned the Eameses, and of course we have to say, I mean, we are very happy that also this exhibition rewrites history in a very positive way in bringing out Charlotte Perriand, who was for far too long just mentioned in this context of, she collaborated with Le Corbusier, and that was the only kind of connection. And so,
I was lucky enough to sort of meet her very briefly in New York when the Architectural League had this conversation with her, and Mary McLeod was good enough to say, come down. But then, of course, the whole world was wanting to say hello. But it's like Paul Thompson said, and that Tim mentioned, really, that here's this fantastic force of nature, really, with energy. And I mean, almost just being her presence was, you went out wanting to be the better person and to be like her. It's hard to know because I think there's so many factors with so many people, historical. I think class is important. The person that I'm reminded most of tonight is someone who's very close in age to Perriand, which is Eva Zeisel, who was born in Hungary and lived between sort of Austria and Vienna. She had this bohemian feminist mother who ran away from her sort of Polish rabbi father, her and her friend, when they were 15. The friend married someone who was a friend of Trotsky in hiding. And then Eva's mother, in the sort of 1890s, attends one of the first world feminist conferences, and that, what they used to call the woman question and things. So Eva just had this self-confidence. And you and I were talking about this earlier, travel everywhere. She went off to Russia in 1932 on her own. They made her head of the ceramics and glass industry and sent her to the Ukraine and goodness knows where. And then she was imprisoned there for 16 months and things. But Eva would talk about design in terms of creation, but she used the word love a lot. This was really important. This was her gift. This was her gift of love, and this is how she would talk about it. And I used to say to her, the only other people I know who talk about love are the Eameses. Otherwise, it was seen as really soppy, especially in the mid-century. It was not something you did. And Ray Eames would have these, the computer films, and she'd put red hearts and flowers all over them. And this was seen as this woman who was like contaminating Charles because they did these fuzzy feeling things. And so if there are any other designers, out there who actually openly embrace those sort of feelings about their work and want to use them to convey and connect. And of course, the Eameses, in fact, moved into communications theory, well, Ray would never have used that word, but that's effectively sort of what it was. So, love and empathy is I wasn't really expecting to talk about love tonight, but it somehow popped. I can't get it out of my head anyway. So yes, I mean, she's not alone in that sense of, yes, that didn't matter because almost the force of their positions, their luck, their talent that does make other people recognize them, and actually their experience. I think Perriand was probably a talent that clearly they recognized, and actually she had something very much to offer them. It was not one-way traffic.
Absolutely. I would like to probably lead us to the last question to Annie, to kind of say this, what Pat just mentioned, the kind of feely thing, the love. Is this something that can be dangerous for women to kind of engage with? Because this seems to be exactly the corner where we would like to be seen by many people.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought this up, Pat, and thank you for following that up. When you were speaking, Pat, I kept thinking, very little has changed in that regards. You know, I'm a female designer, still fairly young, perhaps not as young as I hopefully look, but sheerly being a woman and talking about themes such as empathy is often provocation enough. I think it's fascinating what kind of response that in itself as a starting point can often cause in people. And it's something I've learned to really use to my advantage. I think it becomes quite a good tool and almost like a test in terms of how people respond to it. A lot of my work, you mentioned briefly, I've been collaborating with the Finnish Parliament for years now, working with politicians to try and bring empathy into the political decision-making process. I can hear Pat laughing. It's certainly a challenge, and it's an ongoing, long-term, probably lifelong project. But just using it as an example, talking about empathy in that context, and especially coming from a woman, I've had so many almost violent responses to it, because when you're talking about quite an emotional, often as this empathy seen as this soft skill, this touchy-feely thing, even though it's so much more than that. It has this radical transformative power that is scientifically proven. But so much of what I'm also trying to do is reframe the way we see and use empathy. But in a lot of these contexts, even just the notion of thinking about empathy in this way almost shakes the system to its core. And for many people who may have built their identities and lives and careers within the old system, it's such a strange notion and such a scary notion to think about these emotions or these themes in that way. So I think there's certainly a lot that we can do, and things that I try and do in my process, which is to try and bring people in at different stages. So it's never about excluding anybody, but at the same time, when we're trying to really reform society, as we talked about, on a large scale, on a very systemic scale, if we're talking about large scale systems redesign, it's we have to appreciate as well that even just these themes in themselves are radical. I wish they weren't, but they are.
Very much so. I would like to kind of pause the discussion here with regard to our time. I hope that we can come back to many of these aspects in the Q&A afterwards. Thank you so much, Pat, Letizia, and Annie, for the very stimulating interventions. I will hand over now to Justin McGurk, who will chair the next session with Pernette and Jacques.
Thank you very much, Jana.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here in this very gracious room in the French Institute. And it's a great pleasure to have with us tonight Charlotte Perriand, or Pernette Martin Barsac, as she's also known, and her husband Jacques Barsac. As Tim said, you know, they've just arrived in London. They weren't able to visit before today. They weren't able to see the exhibition until 4:30 today, so they've had a quick whip round. I should say my name is Justin McGurk. I'm the chief curator at the Design Museum, and I had the pleasure of immersing myself in Perriand's life and work for a year. And so it was a great relief to me that Jacques and Pernette enjoyed the exhibition tonight. We also have with us Claire, who's going to be interpreting. And I shall just say, and we probably don't need to interpret these remarks yet, but I just want to say, as we enter the kind of final phase of tonight, that I so enjoyed that conversation that we just had and those 4 presentations. I learned a lot. I thought it was fascinating. And while tonight we're going to be looking a little bit at Perriand's connection to London, I wanted to use this moment to just bridge that conversation with this one, since we have Pernette with us to talk about feminism briefly, or the role of Charlotte as a kind of female role model in design. Because when we opened the show, journalists in this country were very taken with two things. One, the idea of the appreciated female designer. And it's true, there are very few women designers in the canon of modern design who got the same kind of recognition that the men did. So they were fascinated by that idea and the famous story of Le Corbusier rebuffing her when she comes to the studio, saying, "We don't embroider cushions here." But in fact, Charlotte was one of the few women designers in the 20th century who did get credit for her designs, who did become a well-known designer. And the other thing they were interested in is this idea of collaboration. And I've been asked, Claire, stop me if you want to translate, but maybe translate the point about the role model, the kind of Charlotte being an underappreciated female designer, and I'll move on to the next.
Charlotte était une designer qui était très peu appréciée en tant que féministe.
Well, actually, I was saying the British press liked the idea that she was underappreciated, but in fact, she was one of the few women designers who were appreciated.
La presse britannique a souligné le fait qu'elle était peu appréciée, mais en fait, c'est l'une des seules architectes femmes et designers femmes qui, de son vivant, était appréciée et très reconnue.
And the other point that they were interested in was this question of collaboration, which came up earlier. And I was asked more than once whether her collaborative spirit was linked to the fact that she was a woman.
La presse britannique était très intéressée par le fait que Charlotte était une grande collaboratrice avec d'autres artistes et la presse britannique se demandait si justement cet esprit de collaboration venait du fait qu'elle était une femme.
And I didn't feel qualified to answer that. And for me, the best I could do was to say, well, part of it was her belief in the idea of synthesis, that design had to be a synthesis with architecture and with art. And that worldview meant collaboration.
En fait, peut-être qu'une thèse, c'est que son esprit de collaboration vient de sa croyance en la synthèse de tous les arts.
So it would be wonderful to hear a few words from Perrand about how she thinks her mother saw herself in this context.
Donc, ce serait formidable d'entendre vos avis sur votre mère en tant que collaboratrice et aussi en tant que designer femme.
Alors déjà, en tant que collaboratrice, qu'est-ce que vous entendez par collaboratrice?
What do you understand by collaborator?
You see, this is a very sticky topic. Because of course...
C'est compliqué.
Oui, parce qu'il faut toujours... C'est vraiment pour nous un gros problème. Charlotte, on la marie toujours avec un homme.
It's a big problem because Charlotte is always, in a way, put together with or married with a man.
Mais elle était Charlotte sans les hommes.
But she was Charlotte without men.
And it's not Charlotte. Ce n'est pas Charlotte Perriand qui a collaboré avec des hommes. Ce sont des hommes qui ont collaboré avec Charlotte Perriand.
Et qui sont venus la chercher.
It wasn't Charlotte Perriand who collaborated with men, but it was men who came specifically to work with her.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that Charlotte, in these collaborations, Charlotte is the lead creative.
Charlotte était toujours la chef dans les collaborations. C'était elle qui menait les collaborations.
Oui, oui, je suis tout à fait d'accord.
But
Absolutely.
I'm interested to hear from Perrand how her mother, she must have been aware of her position as a rare, well-known designer, and I wonder whether she was conscious, I mean, how conscious she was of that and how much she would have recognized that she was a role model.
À quel point est-ce que Charlotte était consciente du fait qu'elle était une inspiration en tant que femme, étant l'une des seules femmes dans ce champ de design et d'architecture?
Mais je pense que au niveau du travail, Charlotte disait toujours, il faut être la première dans son travail.
In terms of her work, she always said that she had to be the first and the
Et
best.
elle n'avait vraiment aucun problème entre elle et les hommes. Et au niveau du travail, c'était la même chose. Qu'on soit femme, homme, c'est pareil.
She never had a problem working with men because for her, whether one was a man or a woman, it was the same.
Raconte quand elle a eu un problème avec un homme une fois.
Once she had a problem with a man.
Moi, j'ai assisté un jour à l'ambassade du Japon à Paris. Je l'accompagnais quand elle faisait la résidence de l'ambassadeur. Et elle arrive sur le chantier, et sur le chantier, elle voit un interrupteur posé à une mauvaise hauteur par rapport à une poignée de porte.
Once I went with her to the building site of the Japanese embassy that she was working on, and a switch had been put at the wrong height in relation to the doorknob.
Donc elle appelle l'électricien et elle lui demande pourquoi cette prise de courant est posée à une mauvaise hauteur.
So she asked the electrician why this plug had been put at the wrong height.
Et cet électricien lui dit mais je n'ai pas d'ordre à recevoir d'une femme.
And the electrician said, I don't take orders from women.
Charlotte lui dit mais vous avez un plan, car toujours quand elle faisait des plans et elle les punaisait au mur pour que ça soit exactement bien réalisé.
Charlotte said to the electrician, but you've got a plan, because she always, with drawing pins, she would always put the plans around the work site.
Et l'électricien dit, moi je m'en fous des plans, ça ne m'intéresse pas, je fais mon métier moi aussi.
The electrician said, well, I don't give a damn about your plans, I'm doing my own job.
Et donc Charlotte lui dit, vous prenez vos affaires et vous quittez le chantier.
So Charlotte said, take your things and leave.
Et il dit non, je reste.
And I'm staying.
Et donc, à l'époque, il n'y avait pas de téléphone portable.
At the time, there were no mobile phones.
Elle sort de l'ambassade, elle va au bistrot d'en face, elle téléphone à l'entreprise et elle lui dit maintenant, vous venez chercher votre ouvrier et il sort du chantier, je ne veux plus le voir.
At the time, there were no mobile phones, so Charlotte left the embassy and went over the road into a bistrot where she used the telephone, and she phoned up her company where she was working, and she said, get this worker out of here. I don't want to work with him.
Donc je pense que ça c'était vraiment oui, Charlotte a sûrement eu des problèmes avant la guerre avec les hommes dans son travail. Mais le problème, elle connaissait très très bien l'architecture. Et pour elle, c'était quelque chose de très important, la volumétrie intérieure de l'architecture.
Before the war, Charlotte no doubt had problems with men, but she knew architecture, she knew her job extremely well.
If I can say something about the question of men and women, Charlotte was alpinist, and until the age of 20 years, she climbed. Every time when she see a mountain, she need to climb the mountain. And when you are alpinist, you have the, how you say in English, I don't know, the cordée, the ropes, and you have men, a lot of men, sometimes women, and there is equality between men and women. Vous devez monter au sommet.
There's an equality between the men and women because you all have to get to the summit.
Mais qu'on soit homme ou femme, c'est la même chose. Il faut aller en haut du sommet.
Whether you're a man or a woman, you all have to get to the summit.
Et dans les rapports hommes-femmes, pour Charlotte, c'était ça. C'était une très grande meneuse d'hommes.
For her, work was the same as climbing. She was a leader. She was a real leader of people.
Et il y a une particularité.
Of people or of men?
Oh, she was a leader.
She was a leader.
At this time, there was only women. And I will explain you after in my little conference about the link of Charlotte and Great Britain. And she was the leader. Every time she ordered, but she don't want to appear. And it's very interesting. And when I discover, I know very well the story of Charlotte because she tells us his own story. But when I discover the archive, I discover incredible things. And a lot of time, you have, for example, 10 names of men in the team. But I discover that in the archive, she was not alone, but she was a boss. And she don't want to appear like the boss. That's an interesting thing.
So on the topic of collaboration, it emerges after a year and a half of collaborating with Jacques that he speaks English.
Oh, excuse me, I don't understand what it means when you say that.
But I think, it was mentioned earlier that in every photograph of Charlotte, she has this kind of angelic smile and a kind of inner radiance comes out.
Sur toutes les photos, il y a un sourire d'ange sur la bouche de Charlotte et une sorte de qui irradie.
But what's clear is that she was fiercely independent, knew how to get her way, knew how to cut her way through a world of men.
Mais en même temps, c'était quelqu'un qui avait un sens de l'indépendance féroce et qui savait mener les hommes.
Oui, elle souriait beaucoup, mais ce qui était vraiment extraordinaire, c'est que pour elle, elle n'avait jamais de regret des choses. Elle n'était jamais aigrie. Elle pensait toujours à la vie, au bien-être des hommes, à créer. Et ça, c'est ce qui la rendait heureuse.
Yes, she was someone who always smiled and she was someone who never regretted anything, was never bitter and always thought of the well-being of the people around her.
Well, look, we haven't got a huge amount of time, so I would like to ask Jacques to tell us a little bit about Charlotte's relationship to London. One of the things we wanted to do in the exhibition, which hadn't happened in the exhibition that was at the Fondation Louis Vuitton in Paris, was to recreate one of her London interiors, which was the Air France agency on New Bond Street from the 1950s. And Jacques can point us to a few very important moments of connection with London and Britain more generally. So, Jacques, a few words from you on this, and then perhaps we can come back to some of the speakers earlier for questions.
Ah, c'est peut-être dans l'autre sens, in other way. Oh yeah.
Voilà.
Oh, Pernette, you want to talk about this, Pernette? Tu veux parler de ces photos après? Après. She will talk after because she shows a few beautiful photos of Charlotte, and I want to talk. Before to start, I want to say something. 3 hours ago, we discovered a beautiful exhibition. and it was really fantastic. It strange because Bernette worked a lot with Justine by phone, but it was the first time that we see the exhibition. And your exhibition is fantastic. After the exhibition in Fondation Louis Vuitton, it was very dangerous to do this kind of exhibition because you can say, well, perhaps it would be cheaper than Vuitton. No, it's absolutely different. And the quality of everything, congratulations to you, Justine, and all your team, because it's fabulous exhibition.
Thank you, Jack.
Bravo. And Bernette, you want to say something?
Alors, avant de venir vous retrouver, on a fait un saut très vite pour voir l'exposition. On l'a vue très rapidement, mais après avoir vraiment travaillé ensemble pendant quelques mois, depuis le début de l'année, c'est vrai que ça a été très difficile parce que ça a été par Zoom et vraiment, le résultat est vraiment formidable. J'ai été très heureuse de le découvrir et je crois que demain après-midi, je vais passer mon temps à faire des photos dans l'exposition. En tous les cas, merci beaucoup pour tout ce travail qui est formidable.
Et merci à vous.
Before coming, we very quickly popped into the exhibition at the Design Museum, and it was very hard this year to work on Zoom, so we were really delighted to see the exhibition. We think it's fantastic, and tomorrow we're going to go back and take loads of photos. So thank you.
Well, I will try to. My English is absolutely horrible, and if you have difficulty, please help me. No. Yeah. Well, I will very quickly talk about the link between Charlotte Perriand. This guy that you see was an Englishman, and Charlotte married with him in 1927, and he was older than her, and for Charlotte it was a way to take his liberty par rapport à ses parents.
It was a way to get freedom from her parents by marrying this Englishman.
Et il y a une chose qui m'amuse beaucoup. Alors, est-ce que c'est à cause du brouillard de Londres?
Something that I find quite amusing is, well, did she marry him because of the English fog?
Elle a fait beaucoup de photos de lui.
She took a lot of photos of him.
Et il est toujours flou.
And they're always fuzzy or blurry.
And it's very funny. I try to have one photo, but how do you say flou?
Blurry.
Blurry. And it's very, very funny. In 1932, they divorced because the story was impossible, and Charlotte was a very, une femme libre.
She was a free woman.
Et entre le communisme et le mariage,
between communism and the marriage,
elle a choisi l'architecture moderne, le communisme et la liberté.
She chose modern architecture, communism, and her own freedom.
Parce que Charlotte était une femme très engagée politiquement dans les années 30.
Because she was a very politically committed woman in the 1930s.
Et donc, elle publie en 1929 un manifeste qui était pour elle très important, bois ou métal.
In 1929, she published a manifesto which was very important to her, called Wood or Metal.
Je voulais lire certains passages et puis ce serait trop long. It's very too long to read. Can you read on the screen? Is it possible? Well, okay. Very quickly, metal play the same part in furniture as cement has done in architecture. It's a revolution. And for Charlotte, metal, she discovered metal in 1927, and she made his first furniture in metal. And for her, it really a revolution. Et est-ce que vous voulez lire un peu? On a le temps ou pas? Est-ce que can you read some part?
I'll read a phrase. There's a bit where she talks about the new man. Where is that?
Yeah. It's downstairs.
Oh, yeah. I understand by the new man the type of individual who keeps pace with scientific thought, who understands his age and lives it. The aeroplane, the ocean liner, and the motor are at his service.
And this manifest was very important for Charlotte. And she published in the studio in 1929. In 1930, she do this stand for a company, Vanesta. I don't know if Vanesta exists today, but it was a very important company. They made plywood. And at this time, this stand is a kind of manifest. You have here, for example, metal. Here you have a tronc d'arbre. How you say?
A tree trunk.
Yeah. And here you have plywood on the right. And plywood for Charlotte is interesting because it's between industry and nature. It's a kind of domestication of the nature of the trees. And for her, industry was very important because it's only with industry that you can qu'on peut résoudre le problème de l'urbanisme, de l'architecture et du design pour le plus grand nombre.
So it's only with industry that you can solve the problem of architecture, design, and urbanization for the greatest number of people.
And at this time, all the artists think that industry was the solution of the problem, because at this time, the habitation was terrible in all the different capitals of Europe. And this time, this Vanesta stand was very important for her. In 1933, elle réunit tous les jeunes architectes avant-gardistes européens.
She brought together all of the young avant-garde architects in Europe
de tendance communiste.
Who were of a communist tendency, who had communist leanings.
Et elle fait la première exposition de jeunes architectes avant-gardistes européens.
And she held the first exhibition of young avant-garde communist architects.
Et à Londres, elle est en contact avec le groupe Tecton.
And in London, she was in contact with the Tecton group.
Et elle fait de la promotion de cette réalisation que tout le monde connaît et qui est à côté d'ici, le zoo.
And she, this gave publicity to the building that everyone knows, which is the zoo, the Regent's Park Zoo.
Yeah. And this is photo of the zoo with the bâtiment, the building from gorille, le bâtiment.
Penguins.
Oh, that's the gorilla.
Penguin, voilà.
Oh, it's a penguin.
Et des girafes.
And the giraffe compound.
Et at this time, à cette époque, donc, elle organisait tous les jeunes architectes européens de l'avant-garde.
During this period, she was the person who helped to organize or to bring together all of the young avant-garde European architects.
Et on voit à travers son engagement dans l'urbanisme, parce qu'on ne parle jamais d'urbanisme à propos de Charlotte.
People never talk about urbanization and town planning in relation to Charlotte.
Et on voit combien Londres est central dans l'organisation des urbanismes et des architectes d'avant-garde.
But we can see how London was really central in questions of town planning and avant-garde town planning.
Et elle écrit avec José Luis Sert, qui est un architecte catalan,
With Josep Lluís Sert, who was a Catalan architect,
oui, qui va être un grand professeur à Harvard et qui fonde l'école d'Harvard avec Gropius.
who then founded the famous school at Harvard with Gropius.
Et ils vont se rendre à Londres pour éditer le premier livre qui va comporter être la Bible de l'urbanisme moderne.
And they came to London in order to publish a book that became the Bible for modern town planning.
Et il reste un mois pour éditer le livre, mais à cause de la guerre d'Espagne, le livre sera publié aux États-Unis.
They had left just a month to publish the book, but because of the Spanish Civil War, it had to be published later.
Mais Charlotte et les architectes et urbanistes anglais critiquent beaucoup, bien sûr, les embouteillages, la pollution et proposent des solutions urbanistiques.
Charlotte and the other town planners very heavily criticised London for its the fact that it was overcrowded and for its traffic, and they proposed solutions.
Et la charte d'Athènes, qui est la base de leur philosophie élaborée en 1933,
In 1933, the Athens Charter set out their ideas
va proposer des solutions à toutes les grandes villes.
and proposed solutions for all big cities.
Et normalement, ce livre aurait dû être publié à Londres.
And this book was supposed to be published in London.
Alors après la guerre, Charlotte réalise l'agence Air France.
After the war, Charlotte created the Air France agency in London.
Et elle met au point à cette occasion les agences de voyage modernes correspondant aux nouveaux besoins des compagnies aériennes.
And she managed to create travel agencies that were suitable, that were fit for purpose for new tourism and air travel.
Et dans l'exposition au Design Museum, nous avons reconstitué cette grande bibliothèque et cette photo qui donne une idée justement de la nouveauté en 1957.
Pardon, c'était où?
Pardon?
Vous avez dit que c'est reconstitué.
Reconstitué, oui.
Ah, and this is the interior that she had created.
Oui.
Qui était reconstitué.
Reconstitué.
Well, we rebuilt that
right,
wall
okay.
in the exhibition.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Alors, ce qui est intéressant dans cette réalisation, c'est que Charlotte conçoit aussi un peu les bureaux modernes et les bureaux ouverts, les open space.
What's interesting is that Charlotte was creating the modern office and the open plan office.
Et c'est vraiment le début des open space. Ensuite, avec Erno Goldfinger, qui est un grand architecte.
This was really the beginning of open plan spaces, and with a great architect, Erno Goldfinger.
Elle fait le French Government Tourist Office.
She did the French Government Tourist Office.
Et on est en 1959.
In 1959.
Et au fond de l'agence, toute la nuit, elle projette des films.
And at the back of the office, there were films that were projected all night
sur tout le patrimoine français.
On all of France's main sites.
Sur les châteaux, etc.
All of its castles and its great heritage.
Et la nuit, les gens s'arrêtaient et regardaient comme on regarde la télévision, mais à l'époque, il y avait pratiquement pas de télévision.
At the time, there weren't hardly any televisions, and so passers-by would stop and they would watch these films through the window.
Et ils mettent au point un dispositif cinétique en haut de la baie vitrée, France, qui se voyait de tous les côtés sur le trottoir.
They had a kind of 3D sign of France, which you can see here in the picture, that you could see from every angle as you were walking down the street.
Et donc, ils ont travaillé aussi sur la French Rail House, qui était à Piccadilly.
They worked on the French Railway House, which is on Piccadilly.
Les gens qui ont un certain âge se souviennent encore de tout ça.
Some people might remember it. It's now disappeared.
And the lettering has disappeared. The building is there, but it was announced 2 weeks ago, just to make this topical, that building is about to be demolished.
Oh yeah.
Which makes me. Oh, sorry.
Il y a 2 semaines, ils ont annoncé la nouvelle qu'ils vont démolir ce bâtiment.
Which makes me sad, not so much as a preservationist, but environmentally speaking, to demolish a 7-story building to build an 8-story building on top of it doesn't make sense.
C'est dommage, pas tellement du point de vue de la conservation du bâtiment, mais plutôt du point de vue écologique, qu'on va démolir un bâtiment de 7 étages pour créer un bâtiment de 8 étages.
Ouais. Alors là aussi, dans beaucoup de réalisations comme ça, Charlotte utilise des grands tirages photographiques.
In a lot of her work, she used big, blown-up photographs.
Pour donner l'impression que le voyage commence dans l'agence.
To give the impression that your trip really starts in the travel agency.
Et à l'époque, on n'utilisait jamais les grands tirages comme ça.
At the time, there were never really these. It was very unusual to see these very blown-up, enlarged photographs.
Voilà le Mont Saint-Michel dans un bureau qui occupe tout un mur.
This is the Mont Saint-Michel, which takes up a whole wall in one of the travel agencies.
Et elle mettait toujours beaucoup de poésie dans et de la fonctionnalité, mais beaucoup de poésie dans ses réalisations.
She combined functionality with a lot of poetry in her work.
Alors, Charlotte et Erno Goldfinger, I think that you know Erno Goldfinger, ils étaient très, très amis. Et Erno aimait beaucoup Charlotte, alors de temps en temps, il lui envoyait des cœurs comme ça, dans les courriers professionnels.
Charlotte and Erno were very close, and so sometimes Erno would put little love hearts on his correspondence with her.
Et puis, bien sûr, quand il y avait des commandes en France sur les agences de voyage, eh bien, Charlotte et Erno Goldfinger travaillaient comme ça. Notamment, c'est un exemple sur les Champs-Élysées.
This is an example on the Champs-Élysées of a travel agency that Erno and Charlotte worked on together.
Et puis, voilà une photo, bien sûr, de l'exposition au Design Museum en 1996.
So, in 1996, there was a Design Museum exhibition on Charlotte Perriand. This is a photo of it.
Et puis, voilà, arrive la gloire, et donc elle est docteur honoris causa de London College of Art.
So she is an honorary doctor of the London College of Art.
Voilà, une petite évocation de Charlotte et de l'Angleterre.
Mais par contre, tu n'as pas du tout parlé d'une chose qui est très importante. Charlotte a travaillé pendant 70 ans, elle a créé pendant 70 ans. Mais pendant 70 ans, elle a surtout créé pour réaliser le nid de l'homme, comme elle le disait, c'est-à-dire l'habitation.
What you haven't mentioned is that Charlotte worked for 70 years, and what she really tried to create during those 70 years was a nest, was somewhere where people could live. Un nid, vous avez dit un nid, comme le nid d'un oiseau. Yeah, a nest, somewhere to live.
Et donc, ce nid de l'homme, elle l'a vraiment mis en expérience quand elle a travaillé aux Arcs, parce que là, elle a pu réaliser des centaines de bâtiments avec des espaces tout petits pour que les gens puissent venir en vacances.
So these human nests, she really had the opportunity to create when she worked in Les Arcs, les Arcs dans les Alpes, because there she had to create really tiny habitable spaces for the tourists who came.
Pour elle, ce qui était très important, c'était toujours le rapport entre l'intérieur et l'extérieur et l'ouverture sur la lumière et le soleil.
What was really important for her was the relationship between interior and exterior, inside and outside, and also the opening out onto air and sunshine.
Elle ne créait jamais un meuble pour un meuble.
She never created a piece of furniture just for the sake of being a piece of furniture.
Elle créait toujours un meuble pour un ensemble désigné.
She always created a piece of furniture to go in an ensemble, to go together with what was surrounding it.
La première chose qu'elle demandait, moi je me souviens quand Jacques lui avait dit dessinez-moi mon bureau.
When Jacques said, "Can you please design my office for me?"
Et pour dessiner elle aurait pu dessiner un bureau comme ça. Non, elle a commencé à lui demander ce bureau pour vous, qu'est-ce que vous allez y mettre?
The first thing she asked was, "What are you going to put in this office?"
Et c'était l'époque de l'informatique.
And it was the beginning of information technology, the information technology age.
Donc elle était très intéressée de savoir qu'est-ce qu'il y allait y avoir sur ce bureau, comment il fallait passer les câbles. Donc à ce moment-là, elle les passait dans le pied du bureau pour le sortir, pour qu'on ne voit pas de câbles se balader sur le sol.
She was very interested to know what would be on the desk, and she wanted to know exactly where the cables would go, so the cables would have to disappear down the leg of the table so that you wouldn't see them.
L'autre chose aussi qu'elle regardait toujours, c'était le prix.
The other thing that she always looked at was the price that things cost.
Donc, elle ne construisait pas un meuble vraiment pour un meuble. Elle avait toujours un programme et un prix.
She never designed a piece of furniture just for the sake of it. It was always according to a specific program and to cost. According to a cost.
Alors cette photo-là que vous voyez, c'est quand sa mère lui a donné son indépendance. Son indépendance, elle lui a donné à 18 ans.
This photo is when her mother gave her independence at 18 years old.
À 18 ans, à l'époque, ça n'existait pas.
At the time, becoming independent at 18 years old wasn't a thing.
1921.
In 1921.
Donc la première chose qu'elle fait, c'est qu'elle décide qu'elle va partir en Italie.
So the first thing she decided to do was leave and go to Italy.
Et elle va traverser la montagne pour aller en Italie avec une copine.
And she crossed the mountains to go to Italy with a female friend of hers.
Et là, elle va rencontrer des carabiniers superbes.
And there she met very handsome soldiers.
Et ça a été son premier voyage.
And that was her very first trip.
Après, elle a voyagé pratiquement toute sa vie.
After that, she traveled for her entire life.
Elle voyageait pour le travail et elle voyageait aussi pour les vacances.
She traveled for work, of course, but also for her holidays.
Là, vous voyez Charlotte, elle est en montagne.
Here you can see Charlotte in the mountains.
Elle faisait énormément de montagnes, l'été comme l'hiver.
She did an enormous amount of walking in the mountains, being in the mountains, whether it was in the summer or the winter.
Elle a fait la traversée des Alpes à pied l'été du sud de la France jusqu'à Chamonix.
She crossed the Alps in the summer from the south of France to Chamonix.
L'hiver, elle faisait des 4000. Des 4000. Elle montait sur la montagne à 4000 mètres.
À 4000 mètres.
Et elle fait 10 4000 en 10 jours.
So in the winter, for example, she went up to 4,000 meters up the mountains in 10 days.
Et là, elle s'est trouvée, quand elle a fait ces 4000, pris par le mauvais temps. Et donc, elle a été obligée de faire un bivouac la nuit dans la neige.
When she was climbing up these 4,000 meters, the weather was really terrible, and she had to spend the night in her bivouac in the snow.
Et à la suite, elle a décidé de faire ces fameux refuges préfabriqués, le refuge Tonneau avec Pierre Jeanneret et le refuge Bivouac qu'elle a réalisé et qu'elle a mis en haut de la montagne.
So it was then that she decided that she was going to build mountain refuges, and there was one that she built, for example, at the top of the mountain.
Mais elle ne faisait pas que de l'alpinisme ou de la montagne, mais aussi elle faisait beaucoup de canoë, de mer.
She didn't only do mountain climbing and walking in the mountains, but she also loved the sea and especially canoeing.
Là, elle fait le tour de l'île Ibiza.
Here she is circumnavigating Ibiza.
Où ils ont été pris par le mauvais temps.
And they encountered very bad weather.
Elle a failli y rester.
She nearly lost her life there.
Et ça, c'est en
1932.
Oui. In 1932, this photo was taken.
Elle faisait aussi de la spéléologie.
She also did cave. What is it? Cave. She went in caves. Caving. Thank you. She also did caving.
Donc elle était très sportive.
So she was very sporty. She was a real sportswoman.
Mais il y avait peu de femmes à l'époque qui faisaient du sport comme ça.
But there were very few women at the time who practiced sport in the way that she did.
Donc là, vous voyez, elle sourit, elle est jeune.
Here you can see she's smiling, she's young.
J'ai pas mis une photo d'elle que j'avais prise à Tahiti où elle souriait aussi, qui était magnifique. J'ai oublié de la mettre, mais c'est pour vous montrer, elle n'a jamais été aigrie et ça, c'est formidable.
I forgot to include a photo of her smiling in Tahiti, but this is just to show that she was never, vous avez dit gris? Aigrie. She was never bitter.
Et quand on parlait avec elle, souvent, avec Jacques, pour essayer de lui faire dire des choses qu'on ne connaissait pas sur son travail, elle nous disait toujours « Oh, mais vous verrez ça dans les archives ». Ça l'intéressait pas de revenir sur le passé. Ce qui l'intéressait, c'était le présent et l'avenir.
When Jack and I asked her to talk about a certain part of her life, she'd always say, well, just go and look in the archives. What really interested her was the present, living in the present.
Et il y a une particularité aussi. Là, Charlotte est avec des bergers perdus en montagne en 1936.
This is in 1936, and here Charlotte is right in the heart of the mountains with two shepherds.
Et elle était aussi à l'aise avec des bergers qu'avec des ministres.
She was as much at ease with shepherds as she was with government ministers.
Parce qu'elle s'est engagée avec le ministère de l'Agriculture en 1936 pour notamment les congés payés.
Because she got involved with the Ministry of Agriculture in 1936 precisely to campaign for paid holidays.
Et c'était extraordinaire de voir Charlotte qui pouvait parler dans un rapport d'égalité avec un paysan, avec un ouvrier sur un chantier, avec un patron d'entreprise ou avec un ministre.
And it was amazing to see Charlotte speaking in exactly the same way to a farmer or to a worker on a work site, a building site, or to the head of a company or a government minister.
Et elle discutait très souvent à la fin de sa vie avec des étudiants.
At the end of her life, she very often spoke with students.
Parce que ce qui l'importait beaucoup, c'est de savoir comment on allait vivre au XXIe siècle.
Pardon?
Ce qui l'importait beaucoup, c'était comment nous allons vivre au XXIe siècle.
What really interested her was how we were going to live in the 21st century.
Ça, c'est une photo. This is a photo pour les rapports hommes-femmes. Tout est dit.
This is a photo just to show the relationships between men and women.
C'est la dernière.
Ça, c'est
Vas-y.
Ah oui, ça c'est une photo d'elle en montagne. Quand elle partait très souvent seule, avec son sac à dos, et c'était sa façon de se ressourcer.
Very often she'd just go on her own into the mountains with her rucksack, and that was the way that she recharged her batteries.
On aurait pu ajouter une très jolie photo au Japon où elle est dans sa chambre avec une trentaine d'élèves autour d'elle.
We could have added a really lovely photo of her in Japan where she's in her bedroom with about 30 students.
Et tout le monde est très heureux.
And everyone's very happy.
Et le Japon, vous connaissez le Japon, c'est un pays très macho.
And Japan happens to be a very macho country.
Tu racontes?
Ah oui, ça me fait penser à une histoire quand tu me parles du Japon et du macho. Elle se trouve dans le nord du Japon avec son interprète et puis Sori Yanagi, grand designer, qui l'accompagnait, et elle allait voir un artisan. Et la traductrice était très gênée en lui disant, vous savez, vous avez un rendez-vous demain, mais je ne sais pas si vous allez pouvoir quand même y assister, parce que ici, ça se fait dans le haut-fourreau. Le haut-fourreau, c'est le onsen, c'est le bain public où tout le monde se baigne ensemble. Nu.
So she was in Japan, in the north of Japan. She was with her interpreter and with a very famous designer, and they had gone to visit a famous an artisan. And the interpreter had said, "Pardon, vous pouvez juste répéter la dernière partie. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'ils étaient censés faire le lendemain?"
Bon, ils devaient discuter de travail.
Oui.
Et le rendez-vous se trouvait dans un bain traditionnel japonais, mais où ils étaient nus.
So the interpreter was very embarrassed because they were all supposed to have a meeting the next morning, but the meeting was going to happen in a traditional Japanese bath where everyone is naked.
Et donc Charlotte a répondu, mais il n'y a aucun problème.
So Charlotte said, well, it's not a problem.
Et le lendemain, ils se sont retrouvés tous nus, en train de discuter dans l'eau avec un crayon. Charlotte parlait pas du tout japonais, mais bon, ça faisait rien. Ils ont travaillé quand même dans ce bain japonais.
So the next morning, they all got together. Charlotte said it wasn't a problem for her at all, and they all had their meeting. She was there with her pencil, and they talked about that. They had their business meeting.
Et il faut imaginer le Japon en 1940, il n'y avait jamais d'étrangers.
In 1940, in Japan, there were never any foreigners.
Et il y a une femme de 37 ans
And here's a woman who's 37 years old
qui arrive pour diriger des écoles, des artisans, des petites industries et compagnie.
And here's a woman who comes 37 years old in order to manage, to direct, to lead schools and artisans.
Pour réformer ces entreprises. Et
and in order to reform the companies.
Et donc, tout le monde a les yeux comme ça en voyant une femme.
Everyone's eyes were on stalks looking at this woman.
Et Sori Yanagi, l'assistant et la traductrice, ont tout de suite trouvé la solution.
So the interpreter and the Japanese designer immediately found the solution.
Ils allaient devant les responsables que Charlotte devait rencontrer.
They went in front of the people who Charlotte was supposed to be meeting.
Et la traductrice disait à la personne, elle est payée aussi cher que le Premier ministre.
And the interpreter said she's paid as much as the Prime Minister.
Et là, on respectait les femmes.
And then she was respected as a woman.
Well, on that note, I think, I was given strict instructions by Isabel to make sure we finished 10 minutes ago. So forgive me for not finding time to bring the previous speakers back, which I hope to bring them into the conversation, and forgive me for not having time for more questions, because I also have a long list of thank yous to read. Sorry? Oh, you do want to do? Okay, well, we can take a couple of questions. Let's do that then. So,
Il va y avoir quelques questions.
maybe Annie and Jana, if you'll come back up, and if we'll bring back our virtual panelists, we can take a couple of questions from the floor, because it would be really nice to hear from you. So if anything you've heard tonight stimulates a question, a burning question, or a light-hearted question, we would really love to hear from you. And we've got hands in the air. There's a lady here. You might have to shout, but I can also repeat your question.
Can I answer the question in French to Pernet and then translate into English?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. Pernet, c'est vous. Je vais essayer de parler très fort à cause du masque. Merci de votre présence. En fait, je me demandais, parce que là, on a vu l'aspect public de Charlotte Perriand, son énergie de vie, sa créativité, ses rapports avec les hommes, etc. Mais puisque vous l'avez côtoyé de façon si intime, je me demandais comment sa créativité s'exprimait à la maison au jour le jour. And so in a nutshell, the question is, how did Charlotte's creativity express itself in a sort of domestic space with Pernet, as opposed to the sort of more public facing?
So just to repeat the question, it's how did Charlotte's creativity manifest itself in the home as seen by Pernet?
Oh là là, alors je vais vous dire, c'est que je ne la voyais pas beaucoup, Charlotte, en réalité.
I didn't actually see her, Charlotte, very much.
Alors, elle était tellement prise par son travail que je n'osais pas d'abord tellement la déranger.
She was so occupied with her work that, first of all, I didn't really dare to interrupt her.
Alors ça, c'est quand j'étais petite.
When I was little.
Après, quand j'ai travaillé un petit peu avec elle, c'était différent.
Then when I worked with her, it was different.
Mais elle était toujours prise par son travail. Donc, les rapports étaient très souvent professionnels.
But she was very occupied with her work, so my relationship with her was more professional.
Alors, où elle m'exaspérait, c'est que elle me téléphonait aussi bien à 11h qu'à minuit pour me dire « Ah, j'ai pensé à telle chose, demain matin, il faudra peut-être parler sur ce problème à résoudre. »
She used to drive me mad because she'd ring me up at 11 o'clock or midnight saying, oh, we've got to sort this or that out for tomorrow.
Par contre, j'aimais beaucoup partir avec elle pour voyager parce que c'était des expériences qui étaient formidables.
What I really loved doing with her was traveling because it was always really an incredible experience.
Mais je détestais aller avec elle en montagne.
But I hated going to the mountains with her.
Parce qu'elle me faisait monter à pot de phoque.
Because she made me go up really steep mountains.
Et à chaque fois,
à pot de phoque. Oh, carrément à pot de phoque. Oui. Oh, she made me go up mountains with like seal skin on the bottom of my skis.
Et on ne voyait jamais le sommet. Il y avait toujours une montagne plus haut et plus haut.
We could never see the summit. There was always another mountain behind the one we were climbing.
Ah oui, elle me promettait du chocolat pour me faire avancer.
She promised chocolate as a kind of bribe to get her up the mountain.
Elle a cassé beaucoup de gens, d'hommes en montagne.
Oui, beaucoup.
Elle a cassé
Many men were broken by her in the mountains.
I think that's the quote of the evening. Do we have another question? Yes, at the back there.
You imagine your exhibition at the Design Museum. How did you do to differentiate it from the one at the Louis Vuitton Foundation and also the one at the Design Museum in, I don't know, in the 90s?
Excellent question. So it's aimed at me, and it was how did we manage to differentiate the exhibition at the Design Museum from the one that was at the Fondation Louis Vuitton last year and the one at the previous Design Museum 25 years ago? Well, in some ways that was easy because the Fondation Louis Vuitton had devoted the entire building to the Perriand exhibition and we just had our main gallery, so we had less than half the space. And the Fondation Louis Vuitton exhibition was a kind of once-in-a-lifetime extravaganza that had a huge amount of art by Léger and Picasso. So it was in some ways a representation of Charlotte's world as well as Charlotte's work. And so the obvious thing for us to do was to bring the focus back to Charlotte herself and to being the design museum, we love to show people's process, their creative process. So we tried to show more of the drawings. There's a whole case in the first room of drawings for the metal furniture in the late 20s, which hadn't really been shown. And that's super interesting for us. So to show her creative process, that was one thing. And the show 25 years ago at the Design Museum, I think her reputation has changed somewhat since then. That show, I think even Charlotte was a bit peeved at some point during that exhibition that they were presenting her as a furniture designer, not as the kind of great interior architect that she was, possibly the first interior architect, actually. And Jacques mentioned José Luis Sert, the great Catalan architect, earlier, and possibly my favorite quote about Charlotte Perriand is by him, so observant. He said, "She approaches the interior like an urban planner." And I think that really sums her up. And now I'm being given the guillotine symbol, I'm afraid, which in traditional French culture means time to stop. So I'm just going to say a few thank yous. Firstly, thank you to everyone who spoke earlier, to Jana, Pat, Letitia, Annie, the wonderful presentation from Hélène. Thank you, a special thank you to Pernette and to Jacques for managing to make it all the way to London today on the Eurostar and sharing your wonderful stories with us. It was such a joy as a chair to just sit back and let them, lead. Thanks so much to Isabelle and to Bertrand for hosting us here in the Salle Classée at the Institut Français. Thanks to the French Embassy for the support and the promotion of French culture and art and design in the UK. We'd like to extend our thanks to all the partners who supported this event on both sides of the channel. So the Design Museum, I probably don't need to thank them, but on behalf of the Institut Français, I will. And the École Nationale Supérieure d'Art et de Design de Nancy. Thank you to them. Thanks also to Martha Leco-Choix, who translated Alain Bertin's video. Thanks to Norma Editions, who published the Catalogue Raisonné of Charlotte Perriand. Thanks so much to Claire Finberg-Deligiani, who interpreted us for tonight brilliantly. Thank you for doing that. Never an easy job. And just to say that tonight's talk is available on the Institut Français Facebook and YouTube accounts. So you can tell your friends to check it out. And also thanks to all of you for joining us. I personally really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. So thanks to everyone here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Justine.
Merci beaucoup, Justine. Merci. Et puis,